Ladies and gentlemen, I must begin by saying I'm indeed delighted to be invited to this occasion. As Mrs. Prince will tell you, the Productivity Center is always ready, willing, and able to work with the foundation. And we're always excited to participate because more than anybody else, we fully recognize the negative impact that lack of literacy imparts to productivity. So we see you as partners, natural partners, really. Okay? All right. This presentation is really just touching a few issues to give you some kind of perspective. But I'll start by providing a few definitions for productivity. Then I'll indicate the magnitude of the benefits that emanates from productivity improvement. I'll say something about how productivity impact Jamaica's development. In toning down, I'll speak about the critical drivers of productivity, the things that drive productivity, and obviously literacy is one of those. Then I'll close by speaking about the need to build a productivity culture and how literacy contributes to building that productivity culture. Okay. I think when we speak about productivity, we are talking about two things. We are talking about efficiency, and we are talking about effectiveness. So productivity is nothing more than the efficiency and the effectiveness with which we convert raw material into products or services. Efficiency really is a measure of how well resources such as land, labor, capital, materials, and so on are used to produce goods and services. So for example, if I speak about the tons of cane required to produce a ton of sugar, I'm talking about the efficiency with which a factory converts cane into sugar. Okay? And interestingly, there are some factories that convert a ton of cane, 10 tons of cane to a ton of sugar. There are some factories that use 15 tons of cane to a ton of sugar, and there are some that use 8 tons to produce a ton of sugar. So you can see the variation in efficiency across different productive sectors. Okay. Effectiveness. Effectiveness is all about whether the goods or services we produce satisfy consumers. If it does not satisfy a consumer, it does not have a place, it does not have a market. Right? And consumers are particularly interested in quality, the utility of the goods, the price of the good, the convenience, the timeliness with which it is delivered, and the customer service associated with it. Those are just some of the things that consumers are concerned about that makes for effectiveness. Okay? That was basically the economic argument about productivity. I'm going to turn now to a philosophical definition, which I think is probably as important as the economic definition. Productivity, whether we're dealing with the private sector or the public sector, we have to be concerned about, one, the fact that productivity is a state of mind. Right? It's an attitude that seeks improvement over what exists. In other words, everything can be improved upon. Everything we do, we can do it better. Right? The second element is that be a conviction that I will do better today than I did yesterday, and I will make tomorrow better than today. So those are things we need to plant into our psyche. You know, we need to think about them. We need to bear these things in mind every day. Because if you come to work and you decide that, look, every day that I come to work, I'm going to add some value. Some people come to work, but no value is added. Some people come to work, but actually value is subtracted. Huh? I guess you don't believe me. Okay. Okay. Turning to the benefits of improved productivity. What I tried to do is to depict it in terms of a diagram. And there are at least 3 elements to the diagram that I want us to pay close attention to. The first element is that inner circle, right, is, say, where we are today, right, where we are at a particular point in time in terms of the output that productive or non-productive people produce, right? That output has to be divided among a number of claimants, if you will. There are the workers who claim part of the output in terms of wages or salaries. Then there is the investor who invested his money. He wants profit, and he wants to pay dividends to the people who have equity in the business. Then there's the company that benefits from depreciation of assets and retained earnings. Then there is the financier who has to be paid his principal and his interest. And then there's the government who wants the taxes to provide goods and services. Okay. Now, if the inner circle represents the initial output which people produce, and we are able to increase productivity, right, then we can take it to, say, the middle circle, right? Because increased productivity is nothing more than producing more with the same level of inputs or less level of inputs. Okay? So if we can increase that inner circle to the second circle, then you realize that there's a bigger cake to be shared. And if we increase it even more to the outer circle, then there is even a bigger, and each claimant will get a bigger slice of the cake. Conversely, if productivity is declining, the converse is true. Right? Okay, so I think this kind of demonstrates what we're talking about. I want us to think for a moment that all the activities we pursue in life, the ultimate goal is improve standard of living, right? That's the ultimate goal. We're going to achieve higher standard of living only when we achieve higher GDP. And if GDP is growing faster than the population, then GDP per capita will also be growing. Okay? So that's a critical part of my analysis. Okay. Higher GDP can come from the 2 classical factors of production: labor and capital. Okay? But if we have increased contribution from labor, it goes straight into the GDP in terms of making the GDP larger. So if, for example, if we put more of our people to work, right, we have a larger GDP automatically, assuming that they are productive anyway, right? In other words, assuming that they come to work and add value. Okay. Now, the second contribution goes straight in terms of higher capital intensity, and I'll explain to you what I mean by that. Goes straight into making the economy and the enterprise more productive And if we have more productive enterprises, then we have a more productive economy, and then that goes to increase GDP also. Right? But by capital intensity, I mean that capital is used more efficiently. In other words, if I have a factory and I have one shift, I have X amount of capital in the factory. I have one shift, I operate an 8-hour shift. Right? If I operate 2 8-hour shifts, right, it means that I'm using my capital or my machinery more intensively. Okay? All right. So using your capital more intensively automatically increases productivity, because we're talking here about capital productivity increasing. And again, goes to enhance GDP. Okay? The third component I want to emphasize is what we call total factor productivity. Total factor productivity, I'm going to define as the output of the economy or a business after that is not explained by the contribution of employment and the contribution of capital. So it is the residual, all the other things in the economy that goes to increase output. So we're talking about the quality of the workforce. Okay? What is the workforce made up of? What is the quality? Right? Is it made up of knowledge workers? Is it made up of thinkers? Is it made up of skilled trade people? Is it made up of fundamentally of people who don't think, or people who can't think critically, or people who can't solve problems? I think that constitutes the quality of the workforce in this schema. Then we talk about the fifth element that goes towards total factor productivity, or increasing total factor productivity, which is the quality of capital and the systems, the processes, and so forth. So for example, in terms of my analysis, if we think about it, if in 2011 we are using, say, 1920 or 1914 technology, then we're not going to have that improvement in total factor productivity that is going to grow the economy and drive the economy in a competitive way. Okay, so we really need to have the right systems. Somebody was telling me the other day that they work in an organization and very senior position too, but they couldn't write a letter to one of their clients because the boss wasn't there to look at it before it was sent off. It means that there are problems with the systems and the processes, right? If you have a situation where you're handling the goods too much, you have a problem. So in other words, I'm saying if you produce a good and you put it here, then you take it up and put it somewhere else. I think once you produce the good, it should be transported. But if you probably have it in your storeroom and moving it up and down, you're using labor unnecessarily. And sometimes the way the organization or the building or the production line is laid out, you find that you have the cutters down there, you have the assemblers up here. So the system is not laid out to be efficient. So we're talking about systems and processes and worker-employee relations and the HR input and so on and so forth, right? That is what is going to assist in driving total factor productivity. And indeed, I want to point out to you that total factor productivity in advanced economies and some of the Asian economies is responsible, or growth in total factor productivity is responsible for as much as 70% of the growth in output, right? Because let's look at it. Labor and capital really is finite, right? Your labor certainly is finite, and if your labor is expensive and your capital is expensive, then what you really need to drive output is improvement in total factor productivity. Hmm? Okay. All right. Okay, so this show, we're going to shift a little and talk about labor productivity according to sectors of the economy. But before I do that, anyone want to tell me which of those sectors they think would pay the highest wage or salary, or which of the sector is more productive in terms of labor productivity?
It's the same answer for both questions.
I think they are related. I think they are related.
You get the answer.
Okay. All right. Any others? Manufacturing. Okay. Any others?
Transport, storage, and solicitation.
Okay. All right. I'll give you the answer. I'll give you the answer. Okay. What this shows you is the labor productivity. In other words, the value added for each sector divided by the employed labor force in that sector. Right? And what you'll notice is that those things in bracket, I rank them in terms of numbers. So I don't think we got the thing right. Because mining and quarrying is the most productive, right? And followed by electricity, gas, and water. Then we have the finance, insurance, real estate, and business services, right? So you are nearly right, but there are two more productive sectors. Actually, when we look at it, agriculture, forestry, and fishing was the least productive. Okay, so overall for the economy, the labor productivity for the economy was $219,624 per annum, right? So when you compare the national labor productivity with the sectoral labor productivity, you can see what is happening in the economy. You can, if you ask me, I could tell you that probably one of the things that policy needs to look at is how to move some of the people out of the low productivity sectors into the higher productivity center, and that is how you go and build or increase income and wealth. Now, over the last 10 years, 1998 to 2007, the last column shows you how the different sectors grew with respect to labor productivity. So you can see that manufacturing was the highest grower by 2% per annum. Electricity, gas, and water 1.5, and the bottom three were negative in terms of labor productivity growth. Okay, I'm getting some signals and I have to move. But basically, in terms of labor productivity, what we find is that Jamaica trails most Caribbean countries with respect to labor productivity. All right. What is the implication of labor productivity growth? Very quickly, if we grow by 1% per annum in terms of labor productivity, it will take us 3 generations or 72 years for income per worker to double. Whereas if we grow 2% per annum, right, it will take us 1.5 generations or 38 years for income per worker to double. If we go 3%, it will take us 1 generation or 25 years, right? And if we grow 5%, it will take us half a generation or 13 years. So you see how important it is for labor productivity to not to leap, not to creep or crawl, but to run, to take off. And for it, huh? Exactly. And for it to take off, we need certain human characteristics. All right. Since I'm getting the signal, I'm going to pass those. But the point I was making about labor total factor productivity is very critical, because what this graph shows you is that there's a strong positive correlation between total factor productivity and GDP per capita growth, right? So it says that, look, I mean, Honduras, which has a low total factor productivity, has a very low GDP per capita. Whereas a country like Chile, with a high total factor productivity growth rate, has a high GDP per capita, right? Okay. We know that we have been caught in somewhat of a low growth, low productivity trap in the country, and there are certain things that we need to do to get out of that low productivity, low growth trap. And these are what I call the drivers of productivity. We're talking about technology and innovation. We're talking about organizational structures, which I spent a little time on. We're talking about how we manage the supply chain. And a lot of us don't recognize that when we work in an organization, we are part of that supply chain. So for example, if the secretary does not do certain things, then the entire supply chain is impacted. If the gardener does not do certain things, the supply chain is impacted, right? So I want everybody to see themselves as part of that supply chain, even in your household. If certain thing does not get done, the supply chain is impacted. Performance measurement, very critical. If we don't measure, we don't know where we are, right? And if we measure, it can serve as impetus for planning improvement. Don't underestimate the importance of linking productivity to compensation. Right? I think right now what we do, we give bonuses and so on and so forth, but it's not tied to productivity or to performance. Work ethic, very critical. Labor management relations, a lot have been written about that. Tons of material have been written about that. Investment in physical and human capital. I think Jamaica Jamaica Foundation for Lifelong Learning is a strong example of making investment in human capital, right? Because what it does really is to build human capital. I mentioned in a way about reallocation of resources, because when I said that one thing policy could do is if we could find ways to move people from the low productivity sectors so we're really talking about reallocating resources. And I think we really need to launch a relentless war on waste. So those are really some of the things and some of the drivers that I think we need to look at. But I'm not going to, I think most of you understand where I'm getting at, and since I'm getting the wrap-up signal, I'm going to go straight to the issue of building a productivity culture and the role of literacy in that. It has been said that a literate and educated population must be regarded as the more productive and desirable, and to tolerate pockets of illiteracy and under-education is to tolerate waste of human potential. Okay. I came across this piece of information, and I thought I had to share it with you. Because I found it really intriguing, and so the report found that, the report indicated that in 2000, the illiteracy rate was 13.3%, but males were 17.5%, and females were 9.3%. In other words, male illiteracy is almost double that of. And I don't think any of you would shout me down if I tell you that has a positive correlation with crime. Right? You can see some connection there. Okay. I think illiteracy has some negative impacts on productivity. And one way it manifests itself is defective products or poor quality. It reflects itself in waste of time and resources. Because indeed, if you're making a table or if you're making a suit for somebody, and when it is fitted, you have to pull it and start over, the material may not even be usable, so you'd have to replace the material and start over, and you're getting the same pay for the same suit. It's not like you're going to get paid twice, although you make it twice. Okay?
So I think rework is probably one of the biggest enemies of productivity.
And it really is a function of how people, problem-solving capability of people, right? Okay. Training costs. I think illiteracy cause training costs within organizations to be higher than it would be otherwise.
At least if you want to, particularly if you want to introduce technology and to upgrade the workforce.
Probably one of the bigger costs is the cost associated with accidents. An excessive supervisory time in different processes. Okay. In sort of closing, I want to make the point that increased literacy facilitates greater creativity, it facilitates innovation, and greater problem-solving skills, right? And all of these are skills which employers are looking for. A literate workforce is more trainable, more adaptable, less likely to become easily frustrated, and the possibilities of absenteeism are less when the people are less frustrated. And it will help maintain international competitiveness as well as personal success. So I'm just touching on these basic things. I hope I have given you something to think about, and I'm available to ask any questions related to the presentation. Thank you.